Hi, everyone. Can I ask you to settle down? We have plenty of seats in front on either side. So those of you who are further back, if you'd like to join us in front, I'm sure you'll be able to appreciate the details of the art in Maud's talk significantly more if you can see it up front. So please feel free to move and take the seats on either side as well as the back here. So good evening, everyone. Welcome. I'm Professor Vidita Vaidya. I'm a neurobiologist here at TIFR, but in another moonlighting avatar, I'm also the convener of the Art and Archives Committee of TIFR. And it is my absolute pleasure to welcome you here for the first Art and Archives Colloquium of the Tata Institute of Fundamental Research. This is hosted along with our partners, Art Mumbai, who have been with us on this journey as we set up the idea of having an Art and Archives Colloquium here at TIFR. I'd like to welcome our chief guest, Dr. Feroza Godrej, who has been a patron of our art collection. We're immensely pleased that she could join us today. TIFR is privileged to serve as custodian to one of the finest collections of post-independence Indian art. And in a sense, today we are celebrating that collection. We're also immensely pleased that Ms. Seema Jain, Member Finance from the Atomic Energy Commission, is here with us from Delhi. So welcome, ma'am. It's a pleasure to have with us Professor Spenta Vadia, former director, ICTS, our center in Bangalore, and in many ways, one of the first set of faculty, along with our director, former director, Professor Shobha Bhattacharya, who set up the Art and Archives Committee. There's several people here with us who have been champions and supporters of TIFR's art collection. I'd like to also thank Mukita Javeri, who is a friend and patron of our art collection and has been a real support. So we welcome our guests here, and we also welcome our guests who are visiting us here from the Tata Trust, who have generously endowed and supported the activities of the TIFR Art and Archives. And now join me in welcoming the first speaker of the first colloquium, the Art and Archives Colloquium of TIFR, Mortimer Chatterjee. So Mortimer Chatterjee and Tara Lal of Chatterjee and Lal have been closely associated with TIFR's art collection for the past 15 years, and there's no one more suitable to speak about this collection. I'm going to hand over to our Master of Ceremonies, Oindrila Rai Chaudhary, who is the face of TIFR's Art and Archive section, and she's worked tirelessly over the last couple of decades to preserve this precious repository of art that we are custodians of. And once more, let me thank our partners, Art Mumbai, in particular, Zoya Kathawala and Meenal Vazirani for their support. And I'm handing over to Oindrila.
Thank you, Vidita. I add my welcome on behalf of TIFR and Art Mumbai and to this first Art and Archives Colloquium of TIFR. May I request our dignitaries, Professor Jairam Chengalur, Director TIFR and Chairperson of Art and Archives Committee, our chief guest, art historian Dr. Feroza Godrej, and former Director ICTS Professor Spenta Vadia, to join us on the dais. We are honored to have with us our speaker today, Mortimer Chatterjee, as well as Tara Lal of Chatterjee and Lal, and we request you both to please come onto the dais. Yes, Mortimer is already here. Big hand for him.
Yes.
Now, may I request our director, Professor Jairang Tengalur, to say a few words. Please, sir.
Thank you, Andrea. So it's a pleasure to welcome you all to the Arts and Archives Colloquium at TIFR, co-organized by TIFR and Art Mumbai. So as some of you probably know, TIFR was founded just prior to independence. And the vision of our founding director, Dr. Homi Bhabha, was to create a world-class research institute in Mumbai. Dr. Bhabha was clear that in order to create an institution of excellence, you need to have talented and highly motivated faculty. But he was also clear that it was equally important to create an ecosystem in which these people could flourish. And this ecosystem would include providing a physical environment that was aesthetic and conducive to creative work. So in practice, this translated to his placing great emphasis on the location and architecture of the institute, the design of the gardens, as well as the topic of today's colloquium, namely building up a museum-quality art collection. So this indeed has been a very long tradition at TIFR. Another long-standing tradition at TIFR is our engagement with the public. We have a very active outreach program, including public lectures by faculty and eminent scientists. Last week, we had a thought-provoking lecture by the Nobel laureate, Sir Paul Nurse, on what is life. And later this week, we'll have another public lecture by the very well-known cosmologist, as well as Nobel laureate, Professor Brian Schmidt. In addition, we have a regular series of Chai and Wai lectures, which run every alternate Sunday at the Prithvi Theatre in Juhu, where our faculty and students present in accessible language some of the cutting-edge science being done at TIFR. So I would certainly encourage those of you who are interested in sort of knowing what's the latest in science to check out our web pages and our social media feeds for more details. TIFR also has a long tradition of engaging with the fine art aficionados in the city, and today's event is part of that tradition, which we are returning to after a gap of several years. We will shortly hear from one of the true experts on the TIFR art collection about the collection itself and how it was built up, primarily during the tenure of Dr. Homi Bhabha and his successor, Professor M.G.K. Menon. On this occasion, though, I would also like to acknowledge the role that all of the past directors and other faculty and staff members have played in ensuring the upkeep and well-being of TIFR's art collection. And in this context, I'd particularly like to acknowledge the contributions of Professor Shobho Bhattacharya, who set up TIFR's Art and Archives section, as well as Professor Spenta Wadia, who is here with us today, who has been a great champion of TIFR's art and archives. Professor Wadia initiated the documentation of TIFR's art collection via the book by Chatterjee and Lal, as well as the collection of the permanent exhibit on Dr. Homi Bhabha and early science at TIFR, which you can see in the foyer of this auditorium. Both of these efforts were made possible by very generous financial support from the Tata Trusts. The permanent exhibit in our foyer reflects only a very small part of TIFR's archival holdings. TIFR and TIFR faculty have played a very important role in shaping the scientific trajectory of postmodern India, including the early days of the atomic energy and the space program. The TIFR Archives is hence a unique repository of these fascinating times, and it's a treasure trove of information for both the public as well as scholars interested in post-independent science in India. It's a great pleasure today for me to welcome our chief guest, Dr. Firoza Godrej, who has been a friend of TIFR's art collection across several decades. Dr. Godrej was intimately involved in the TIFR NGMA exhibition, which was held in 2011, and which was the first time that TIFR's art collection was available for art aficionados across the city to appreciate. We thank you, Dr. Godrej, for your continued support of the TIFR art collection. We are also honored to have with us today Seema Jain, who's a member of finance for both the Department of Atomic Energy and the Department of Space. And a big thank you to you all who have come all the way to the very tip of Mumbai for this lecture. But before I close, I would like to express our gratitude to Mortimer, who has been a great friend and supporter of our art collection and who has always made the time to help us with our work on the collection. Thank you for that and for so readily agreeing to give the talk today. So welcome everybody again. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Now may I ask Dr. Godrej to say a few words, please?
Thank you, Angela. I've never been on this stage before, except as a backstage worker for a Zubin Mehta concert. And I must say, it's really formidable to stand here and see all of you. TIFR, thank you so much for having me here, I think twice within a month. Once as an environmental person and the other as an art historian. Thank you, Professor Jairam, for your Chengalur, for those kind words. I'm really happy to see my old friend, Dr. Spenta Wadia, amongst us. Vidita Vaidya, Senior Professor and Convener, Art and Archives Committee, TIFR. That's one of her hats, as she mentioned earlier. Andrila Rai Chaudhary, a consultant at TIFR Archives, and I had the pleasure of interacting with her over here. Mortimer Chatterjee, Tara Lal, and Dr. Seema Jain. It's wonderful to have you here from Delhi. It's a good connect, science and art. Believe you me, both ministries are very close to my heart. The Culture Ministry as well as the Atomic Energy Ministry. I would also like to acknowledge there are so many friends in the audience, but I'm really happy to acknowledge the presence of the chairman of the Chhatrapati Shivaji Maharaj Vastu Sangralaya, Mr. Cyrus Gazda, for being here with us today. Thank you, Cyrus. Thank you. It is true that the Tata Institute of Fundamental Research, an institution that has long stood at the intersection, as I said, of science, art, and imagination. The title of this evening's talk, The Epoch of Pioneers, invites us not only to remember the extraordinary individuals who shaped post-independence India, but also to reflect on the ecosystems that allowed them to flourish. Places like this, where curiosity crossed disciplines and culture was seen not as an ornament, but as essential to knowledge. One of the most luminous figures of that era was, of course, Dr. Homi Bhabha. While his legacy in the scientific world is immense, what has always struck me is his instinctive understanding that a society's intellectual life is incomplete without its cultural life. He had an eye for painting, for music, for architecture, and a commitment to nurturing these forms. His support to artists, especially to the Bombay Progressive Movement, was not merely an act of patronage. It was part of a larger vision. He saw in abstraction, both scientific and artistic, a profound freedom, a way to reimagine the world. And in doing so, he helped create an environment where modern Indian art could emerge with confidence and, it's an understatement, but with true originality. This very campus, with its architectural elegance and its collection of modern art, speaks of that legacy. The presence of these works within a scientific institution tells us that ideas do not live in silos. They move across mediums, across people, and of course, across time. And architecture itself was part of this story. We've known for many years, but I'd like to acknowledge here in public amongst so many artistic friends and scientific friends that both Dr. Bhabha and the late Dr. Naval Godrej were very good friends. Godrej and Boyce was proud to contribute to this very building and the buildings across the corridor, supplying architectural fabrications such as the aluminum window louvers that define its long and vast facade. At the time, Godrej's aluminum fabrication business was shaping architectural projects across the country and beyond, standing at the intersection of modernity and aspiration. To see that presence here at TIFR is to witness how industry and imagination could come together in a concrete form. These windows and louvers still stand. Needless to say, they must be requiring constant repair and maintenance, being so close to the waterfront. And it is a matter of personal and institutional pride that Naval Godrej and my late mother-in-law, Sunoben Godrej, were present at the inauguration of these buildings, bearing witness to a moment when science, nation building, and design converged with a vision and a purpose. Bombay, at that time, Mumbai now, during those decades, was a city in motion. There was an openness to experimentation, a porousness between fields. Painters were in conversation with physicists, filmmakers with urbanists. And in small galleries, cafes, salons, and drawing rooms, these conversations took root and shaped the future. When I founded Simrosa in 1971, it was with the hope of creating one such space, a space not only to show art, but to support artists, to provoke thought, and to sustain a kind of dialogue that was both rooted and radical. It was inspired in part by the same spirit that animated TIFR decades earlier, a belief in the transformative power of ideas and the responsibility to give them room to breathe. As someone who came of age in that atmosphere, I carry with me a deep belief in the importance of cultural infrastructure, not only in producing new work, but in preserving the memory. Because if we are to honor the spirit of pioneers, we must also ask, how do we care for their legacies? One answer lies in the archives. Archives are not simply about storage. They're about care, context, and most importantly, responsibility. They ask not just what we remember, but how and for whom. It was in mind that we established our own Godrej archives to preserve the history of the Godrej Enterprises Group. What began as an attempt to document industrial history soon revealed much, much more. Stories of pioneering spirit, stories of work life, stories of design, and aspirations shaping our Indian urban life. And of course, stories of change. Through photographs, letters, oral histories, advertisements, we began to see the extraordinary in the everyday and to recognize that preserving these materials was not a backward-looking exercise, but a forward-facing one, an act of creating access, opening of dialogue, and democratizing memory. Our efforts at preserving history was not to valorize only the grand, but we realized that value also lies in relationships, in communities, in the lives of those who often left out in official histories. In 2011, this exhibition took place at NGMA, as Professor Jairam said, and Mortimer will talk more about it. NGMA didn't have a permanent director. I think at that stage, we didn't even have an advisory committee. And Mortimer said, we want to do this show. We're bringing out a book by Mark, and we have to do it at the NGMA. Can you help? I think we had many meetings. We came and saw the nucleus of this collection. We came and saw the inspiration, the democratic way in which the artist, and I'm not going to let out any secrets, you'll see it all 9 of them, I hope he shows you. Right, Mort? You're going to show all 9, huh? And the debate that took place of who should be the winner. We're talking about 1950s. These chaps were not big names at that time. Sorry, they're all friends. They're all buddies. They were all buddies. And it's amazing how the leader emerged, how the winner, I should say, emerged. And we did this exhibition at NGMA. I remember Professor Barman could meet us only on a Sunday. And we requested Professor Lochan, who was in charge of NGMA Delhi, to please come on a Sunday morning for this meeting, because it was not going to be over in an hour. It was the beginning of many meetings we'd already had, and we wanted NGMA to buy into the project, and they did finally. And it was a stupendous exhibition. I don't think any of us present then or now, or even in the future, will doubt the role that NGMA played in putting up this show. It was a magnificent show. Nothing ever comes out of this building, leave alone the public being allowed in, except into this beautiful auditorium. So it really was a landmark, and all the past directors, the present directors, for supporting it. You really need a big round of applause. Ladies and gentlemen, please give them all a big round of applause. And TIFR too has done this quietly and powerfully by valuing aesthetics alongside intellect, and by nurturing a space where the arts and sciences could coexist and speak to one another. So as we celebrate pioneers today, let us also celebrate the infrastructures that sustain them. The archives, the libraries, the studios, the gathering places. Let us remember that behind every great figure stands a world of support, often invisible, often unrecognized, and that it is our responsibility to record and preserve that world too. Thank you for inviting me into this thoughtful, reflective space, because I think scientists need a lot of reflective space, not only in their sometimes underground labs, and sometimes in the gardens and amongst the trees that you have on this complex. So I'm looking forward to the conversation that follows this evening. Thank you all very much for indulging me. Thank you, my friends. I hope I haven't spoken too much. Please forgive me if I have, and really enjoy this presentation. Thank you so much, Professor Jairam and Professor Spencer.
Thank you so much, ma'am. And now may I request Professor Vidita Vaidya to felicitate our chief guest, Dr. Firoza Godrej, our speaker, Mortimer Chatterjee, Professor. This is for Mortimer Chatterjee. Professor Vadia. Tara, Mrs. Tara Lal. And our director, Professor Jairam Chegalur. We also request Professor Chengalur to honor our speaker for the colloquium today with a token of our appreciation. Now, we request the dignitaries on the dais to please be seated in the audience. Mortimer, please be on the stage. And I request Vidita to introduce our colloquium speaker.
We'll leave your plants, we'll get them to your cars.
We'll
I should put it up there.
Oh, you want to put it up there?
No, we'll get to your car. Don't worry.
Vidita will introduce
Introducing
you.
you first. We'll get there. So it's my pleasure to introduce the speaker for the first annual Art and Archives Colloquium of TIFR, Mortimer Chatterjee. Mort is, along with Tara Lal, are the founders and co-directors of Chatterjee and Lal, which is based in the Kolaba Art District of Mumbai. This gallery is focused on art and design, both contemporary and historical, and has been witness to groundbreaking shows by diverse artists. Mortimer received his master's in history of Indian art and architecture from SOAS, the School of Oriental and African Studies in London. Mortimer and Tara also consult for major corporate collections, including those of the Tata Group and the Godrej Art Collections. Mort has authored as well as co-authored several publications, including on the art collection of TIFR in 2010 and an overview of art from the 20th and 21st centuries as well. He curated the TIFR NGMA exhibition in 2011 along with his partner Tara Lal, and there's perhaps no one better than Mort to speak. In fact, there is absolutely no one better than Mort to speak about this collection. We're immensely lucky to count Mort and Tara as friends and well-wishers of TIFR's art collection over the past decades. They have both generously shared their time with us as we start planning how to re-engage much more with the cultural landscape of the city. We do recognize we're custodians to a remarkable collection, but we also realize that this was a home to many cultural crosstalks between the sciences and the arts and the social sciences. And we hope to increase far more of that in the time that is lying ahead of us. So please join me in welcoming Mort to give this first Art and Archives Colloquium of TI.
Thank you. Thank you, Vidita. Thank you so much. Wow. The build-up has been amazing this afternoon. I'm very grateful to everyone. My thanks to TIFR, to the director and the team at the Institute who are engaging so fully with the Art and Archives collection. And thanks also to Art Mumbai, of course, for partnering. Yeah, we're going to play the PDF, please. I'm grateful to you all for giving me the opportunity to talk this evening about the epoch of pioneers. And Dr. Godrej, I think you've set up so many issues that I want to address in my talk so wonderfully that I'm very grateful to you to be thinking so deeply about what it means to be part of a history that goes back to this epoch. What exactly does that entail? Along with Tara Lal, co-founder of Chatterjee and Lal, and my wife, at the time of first setting foot on the campus of TIFR 15 years ago, it was Professor Mustanzir Balman who was the director at that time, and he was helped in steering the future of the collection with both his predecessor, we've heard Professor Shobhu Bhattacharya, and also Professor Spenta Wadia, who we're lucky enough to have with us today. He was the then distinguished professor in the Department of Theoretical Physics and convener of the TIFR Endowment Fund. And collectively, they put into motion 3 projects, the first being the restoration of artworks in the collection, which was really necessary at that point in time. The second, the book that we've discussed briefly today already. And the third, the exhibition to which Dr. Godrej referred earlier in 2011. And it was with Oindrila Roy Chowdhury, who you've met already this afternoon, and someone who's worked with the collection for longer than me, that we had the joy, the privilege. It was a trial by fire. We got through it, and it was an amazing experience. Since then, I've been lucky enough to continue my association with the campus and the collection, primarily through walkthroughs of this extraordinary collection, opportunities to enjoy the peace and the beauty of this extraordinary campus, something which is, of course, testament to Bhabha's vision. And indeed, to many in the art world, TIFR is primarily known as Homi Bhabha's mythical art palace, where the walls are laden with dazzling, priceless, museum-quality artworks, one piece better than the next, each selected personally by the great man, each representing the heights of that famed project, the Progressive Artists Group. They have also heard something about there being a pretty good scientific research establishment attached. To those faculty and students rightly stung by such slander about TIFR, I offer my apologies. I exaggerate in order to draw attention to the enormous place that the Institute occupies in the imagination of the arts ecosystem, both nationally and internationally. Today, on the occasion of the first Art and Archives Colloquium, I wanted to reflect on the myths and realities of modern Indian art history and the corrective role that the TIFR art collection can teach the observant student. I want to look at the collection through the lens of Homi Bhabha's own engagement with the arts during his short but unbelievably productive life. Assembled at a moment when India was assuming a new identity as a nation, the art collection of TIFR has always been owned and managed by an organization that in its day-to-day functioning has no direct connection to the arts. An individual does not fund the collection, neither has it been donated or lent as part of a philanthropic exercise. Instead, it was built entirely by the institution itself with the specific goal of creating a first-class art collection. That this goal was achieved with such distinction is entirely due to the efforts of its first director, Dr. Homi Bhabha, along with his successor, Professor M.G.K. Menon, and the handful of art world insiders who advised the two. Consisting of little over 250 artworks, the collection at TIFR was essentially acquired between 1952 and the early 1970s. If the collection can be said to represent one idea or argument more forcefully than any other, it is that of an emerging contemporary art scene brimming with self-confidence. Both the period in which the acquisitions were made and the facets of Bhabha's personality gave birth to this vision. It could have been otherwise. Until 1947, the country was still anticipating a fully fledged modernist art movement. And it was really not until the early 1950s that the ramifications of the new winds sweeping through the Bombay art scene were apprehended at a national level. At the same time, the unerring eye for quality of Bhabha, Menon, and their advisors marked these men and women out as connoisseurs of the highest rank, and would explain why it is that from a comparatively small collection, there is such a high concentration of seminal works. A single-minded focus on the idea of the contemporary marks the TIFR art collection. Bhabha, as a patron of the arts, was drawn inexorably to the youthful energy of the art scene as he experienced it at exhibitions in Bombay during the 1940s, 50s, and 60s. His desire was to reflect this moment in the context of a museum-quality collection. That he should have felt compelled towards this goal was the outcome both of his predilection towards the arts, as well as a belief that the institutions he was building had a duty to showcase the most recent experiments, not only in the fields of science, but also the cultural sphere. Bhabha possessed a personality that was driven by the need for action. Unlike most of his peers, he was in a perpetual hurry to achieve the goals he set for himself. This was the case with regards to the art collection at TIFR. And in order to understand the formation of TIFR's art collection, it is imperative to understand Bhabha's own relationship with the arts. He was born in 1909 to a well-respected Parsi family. His aunt on his paternal side was Lady Meher Bai Tata, a champion of women's rights who was married to Sir Dorabji Tata, son of Jamshedji Tata and the second chairman of Tata Sons. As such, he was surrounded by arts and culture from a young age, with access to libraries and art collections, both at his home and that of the Tata family house, Esplanade House, located close to Cathedral and John Connon School, where he studied. Homi's brother was Jamshed Bhabha, in his own right, a major figure in the arts and remembered today as the guiding force behind the establishment of the National Centre for Performing Arts, the NCPA. And here we have family photographs from the 1920s. Precociously intelligent and culturally curious from a young age, Homi took classes in painting from salon artist Jahangir Lal Kaka. Here's a work by Lal Kaka. Lal Kaka was the product of the first generation of Indian artists trained in the late Victorian Academic School of Art at the JJ School. He also studied in England, and Lal Kaka was known as a portrait painter of the well-heeled in India and Britain. Bhabha's early paintings are clearly influenced by Lal Kaka's academic training, here in the form of a painting of a bust. And I'm thrilled that I'm able to show images of Bhabha's paintings as part of my presentation today. These have rarely, if ever, been seen by members of the public since they were moved to the collection of the NCPA after being bequeathed by Jamshed Bhabha after his death in 2007. And I'm very thankful to the NCPA and to Pundals also for the opportunity to share these images with you as part of today's talk. Another work, a nude sketch by Homi. And I think many of us who are familiar with his practice think that perhaps as a sketch artist, he was even superior in some ways as he was to an oil painter. But that's something that you can discover as we look through some of the paintings this afternoon. So here a painting of a sea voyage. After attending Elphinstone College and the Royal Institute of Science, Bhabha went to England in 1927 to study at Cambridge. Although enrolling for the mechanical tripos, his interests soon shifted to theoretical physics and mathematics. Bhabha joined the Cavendish Laboratory, from where he obtained his PhD, with Professor R.H. Fowler as his thesis supervisor. During his time in England, Bhabha met with the important art critic Roger Fry, and in a 1931 letter to a friend, Bhabha reported that Fry felt his artistic powers, quote, would be best expressed in works on a larger scale. He said he would like to see me try fresco, say at New Delhi, close quote. The importance of Bhabha's reference to frescoes in New Delhi is that this was a couple of years after the installation of murals in government buildings in what would become known as Lutyens Delhi. At the time, it was arguably the largest public art commission of its kind and the high point for Bombay artists who were chosen ahead of their counterparts in Bengal. Remember, this was a time of great competition and rivalry between artists of the two regions. This letter marks an awareness of the impact of public art in Bhabha's mind and could be seen as setting in motion a way of thinking about art that would find ultimate expression in the TIFR art collection some 30 years later. And I'm showing you here an image of a work by the well-known Parsi artist of the 1920s and 30s, Rustam Siodia. This is a preparatory sketch for one of the murals displayed in Rashtrapati Bhavan in and around 1929. Along with his scholastic pursuits, Bhabha's time in Europe gave him the opportunity to explore the art scene in person, and he found this a profoundly enriching experience. He was both consumer and producer of culture in Cambridge. Interests in music, design, architecture, and painting are all manifested in the stage decor he produced for a Mozart opera, Idomeno. And you can see here an image on the right from that 1939 production for which he was responsible. Sorry, can we just get rid of the little sign which says Logitech presentation? Was that possible? No, that sign. Can we get rid of that? Okay, don't worry. No problem. In terms of his painting, Jamshed Bhabha recounts that looking at the work of Impressionist and Post-Impressionist painters was responsible for changing his brother's style from, quote, the dull academic manner. Jamshed's summation of Homi's talents as a painter seem about right. Quote, Bhabha was a born artist, even though his primary preoccupation with science did not leave him sufficient time, perhaps, to develop fully his potential capacity. In his paintings, he thought instinctively and naturally. And here we see perhaps a painting of his own studio in Cambridge, alongside a photograph of him painting. And this last self-portrait on the right-hand side, I feel has particular psychological insight into the subject. Very dark, very moody. I think something of Bhabha's own precocious talent somewhere realized within this self-portrait. So here we have paintings of a very different style. And in his later abstracts, one can see the influence of architecture, certainly, and sculpture. And again, we're lucky enough today by having paintings both from the NCPA collection, the one on the right, bottom right, as well as the one on the left from the TIFR collection, to actually start making direct comparisons. And one can see the kinds of connections he himself was making as a painter. Jamshed quotes him as saying, quote, and this is what Homi said, quote, I sometimes find it hard to visualize all the complicated effects of light and shade on the forms that I paint. And I think the solidity would be enhanced if I first was to make small models of plaster and clay. Given the fact that there are a number of semi-abstracts by Bhabha that utilize these identical forms in a variety of different compositions, it seems very likely that he did indeed make models to create these complex tableaux. Apart from the influence of artists and movements from earlier in the century and centuries on his own painting style, Bhabha's intellectual curiosity as a patron was also piqued by historical figures such as Leonardo da Vinci and the Medicis. It is, and in fact, he wrote a substantial essay on Leonardo for Marg. There's a letter in the middle, not very readable, between Mulkaraj Anand and Homi Bhabha, talking about, in fact, that front cover that you see there. And on the left, you see Homi reading a book on El Greco. And indeed, the previous paintings, one can see on the left here, perhaps some influence of El Greco on his own painting style. It is clear that his exposure to the arts increased, and as that happened, he was ever more aware of the impact of patronage on society. This is something that Dr. Godrej has already touched upon, and I'd like to read a quote by Homi after visiting the Uffizi Museum in Florence, in which he spoke about, quote, a man with longish loose hair and face, as if hewn out of a rock, obviously the face of a most extraordinary man. This is Lorenzo de' Medici, Il Magnifico. He trained, among others, Michelangelo as a young boy in his own house. Such men are underestimated. Some historians and critics are too fond of talking of the geniuses without thinking of the genius that made the flowering of these geniuses possible, if only there were such a man today. So I think this is precisely as Dr. Godrej imagines. Who are the geniuses behind the geniuses? And it's precisely someone like Homi Bhabha that emerges to the forefront in the late 40s onwards. Whilst Bhabha continued his PhD research at Cambridge, he frequently returned to India for holidays. On one such visit in 1939, the onset of the Second World War kept him in the country, in consequence of which he joined the Indian Institute of Science in Bangalore, where he would stay and thrive for the next 5 years. Whilst in Bangalore, he maintained his contact with the arts, and in a series of letters we have here, he is in conversation with H.H. Mysore in 1940, the Maharaja of Mysore, and Bhabha discusses approvingly the former's project to record and preserve classical music on vinyl for dissemination. So as you can see, keeping up his relationship with arts and culture in the broadest possible form. And here you see a sketch on the right-hand side from the TIFR archives of a musician. Perhaps it was via the Maharaja that he also made the acquaintance of architect Otto Königsberger, who was the government architect to Mysore state at that time. Königsberger, perhaps with the help of Bhabha's contacts, was responsible for a number of projects on the campus of the Indian Institute of Science and would go on to become a principal architect for a number of Tata projects, including city planning in Jamshedpur. And the relationship, of course, between the Tatars and Homi Bhabha is deep and personal, as we've already seen from his early family photographs. Soon Bhabha's vision for institution building led him to submit a proposal to J.R.D. Tata, the then chairman of Tatars, and someone with whom Bhabha had sustained a long friendship. J.R.D. suggested he approach the Sadorabji Tata Trust, which duly agreed to fund the creation of Tata Institute of Fundamental Research in June 1945. In October of the same year, the organization moved from Bangalore to South Bombay, and it was located in a building owned by Bhabha's aunt until 1949, when it moved to larger premises at the old Bombay Yacht Club close to the Taj Hotel in Colaba. It was in the period of TIFR's earliest expansion that we find the first evidence of Bhabha preparing to commission a new building for the Institute. This is a design by his friend Königsberger, dating to 1946, but somewhere along the line, the architect's vision was not implemented. Indeed, it was not until 1954 that the foundation stone for the present premises of the institution at Navy Nagar, Colaba, was laid, and another 8 years before the buildings were ready to be moved into. In the meantime, Bhabha had secured his position as the leading scientist within the Indian political establishment. Bhabha became director of both TIFR and the Atomic Energy Establishment in Trombay, secretary to the Department of Atomic Energy, and chairman of the Atomic Energy Commission, besides being a close and personal friend of Prime Minister Nehru, with access and influence at the highest levels of government. This is the context within which we should understand the setting up of the art collection of TIFR. At some point around 1952, Bhabha decided that TIFR would house an art collection. It was at this point that he had to make a decision as to which direction the collection would take. In the case of a corporate organization such as Tata Steel, for example, management has decided to commission, with the help of Tata director Jamshed Bhabha, Homi's brother, the European emigre Walter Langhammer to produce a painting foregrounding their accomplishments in setting up Jamshedpur, the city of steel. Bhabha could well have followed suit in leveraging his art world contacts to have works looking at the relationship and intersection between art and science. Instead, he charted a very different course. It had been decided that acquisitions would represent the most interesting work coming out of artist studios and exhibition spaces without regard to subject matter. While some works did indeed end up having some particular symbolism to the Institute, these instances were few and far between. By the first recorded purchases of artwork of TIFR in 1952, he had formed a small coterie of art world insiders who became an informal sounding board for the institution's acquisition strategy. Perhaps the most important person among the group of insiders is the one about whom the least is known. Mrs. Feroza Vadia, generally known as Pipsy, was Bhabha's companion. She was very much older than him, and some have seen their relationship as blurring the lines between the intimacy of lovers and the hierarchy of mother and son. Her engagement with the visual arts seems to have been a close one. Indeed, Bhabha officially inducted her onto the 1962-1963 mural judging committee, about which Dr. Godrej gave a hint earlier. At her death, she left a significant collection to her heirs, and MGK Menon remembers that she would accompany Bhabha to art galleries, and that even after his death in 1966, she would go with Menon himself as he continued to build the Institute's collection. Most significantly, Keku Gandhi, founder of Kemold Art Gallery, recounts in an interview, "The person Bhabha talked to most was Pipsy. I don't remember seeing Homi without Pipsy." And here we have both a sketch and an oil painting by Homi of Feroza Vadia. I feel very lucky to be showing the painting, which again, really the first time that we've seen this in public. Alongside Feroza Vadia, it was Rudi von Leyden who seems to have exercised the most influence on Bhabha's taste in the visual arts. German-born Leyden had moved to Bombay in 1933, since his Jewish ancestry had made him vulnerable in a Berlin increasingly radicalized by Hitler's ascension to power. He became a renowned art critic of his generation. Naturally drawn to the work of the progressive group, he had begun writing favorably about key members of the group, such as Sousa, S.H. Raza, and K.H. Ara, and this as early as 1946. His fondness for Ara in particular is worth mentioning, especially as the Ara's own relationship with TIFR was to become a long-lasting one. This portrait of von Leyden was painted in 1943 by Walter Langhammer, the same artist we saw who was responsible for the Tata Steel Commission, and it won the Governor's Prize at the Bombay Art Society in that year. For me, what is most interesting is that von Leyden is regarding not a piece of contemporary or modern art in this painting, but indeed a piece of classical sculpture, and you also see a humble terracotta vase sat close by. To me, this says something about the way in which the arts was perceived at that time, in a broader, more holistic fashion. Other members of the advisory group included the writer and connoisseur of classical Indian art, Kal Kandalavala, and the mathematician and TIFR faculty, Professor K.S. Chandrasekharan. Chandrasekharan, a leading mathematician of his day, was invited by Bhabha to join the School of Mathematics and gained an interest in the TIFR art collection from an early point. With the Art Advisory Board in place, the next question was the process by which acquisitions should proceed. The commercial gallery scene was not to take off until the early 1960s with the launch of Kemold and Pundol's gallery spaces in around 1963. Prior to that, art was shown in exhibition spaces available to rent, such as the Artists' Aid Centre, the Jahangir Art Gallery, or the gallery at the Taj Hotel. Keku Gandhi, who we've mentioned already, organized many such exhibitions whilst also running his Kemold, that is chemical molding, framing shop on Princess Street. Gandhi's recollection of Bhabha's visits at this time makes for instructive reading. Quote, "We had an unwritten agreement with Dr. Bhabha that we would call him the day before the exhibition and he would give us the first pick. We would give him the first pick. The other part of it was that Dr. Bhabha would drop in from his home and we would introduce young artists to him. At Kemold, he would ask for the frames to be held against the paintings and our chap would have to hold it. Sometimes Bhabha would forget that it was being held for such a long time. In other words, he became entranced. This was his nature, his obsessive nature to look and to regard paintings. And these are some invitations, sadly, maybe difficult for you to read. The one on the left is the third All India Art Conference in the late 40s, which K.V. Gandhi is imploring Homi to come up from Bangalore to visit. And on the right, a very rare invitation of the Progressive Artist Group in 1954, to which Homi was being invited to inaugurate that exhibition. And here we have 3 letters which give us a slight insight into the chaotic manner in which art sales operated at a time before commercial galleries. These are letters written by V.V. Oak of the Bombay Art Society to Bhabha, with the former trying to sell the latter, a work by Sousa, then still called Francis Newton. Interestingly, Bhabha in his letter says not only that Oak is trying to force him into a sale he did not agree to, but furthermore, he would want the work sent to his home for a few days before making any decision. This reasoned methodology for acquisitions would actually be extended to TIFR, where paintings would be hung in public areas in advance of their purchase in order that reaction could be gauged. Jamshed Bhabha is quoted as saying that Homi was able to get Nehru to sanction as much as 1% of TIFR's annual budget for the buying of art, which is testament both to his closeness to India's first Prime Minister, as it is to the importance which the TIFR director attached to the process of acquiring art. Bhabha undertook the acquisition of Sir Jacob Epstein's magnificent cast bronze bust of Albert Einstein, despite the high costs involved. And here you see it on the right and on the left. In 1955, the work cost the princely sum of 3,818 rupees, which was the equivalent to over 50% of the costs of all the 32 paintings that had been acquired in the 2 years the collection had been in existence. Indeed, there is anecdotal evidence, unsurprisingly, that Bhabha did not have an easy time getting this purchase passed. But if there is one work that most closely aligns with the work of the Institute, it is this one. Einstein sat for Epstein over 3 days, during which time the sculpture reported that the scientist, quote, appeared dressed very comfortably in a pullover with his wild hair floating in the wind, close quote. The roughness of the finish is representative of Epstein's technique and the works to lend vitality and potency to the sculpture. Bhabha, whether consciously or not, had assembled what approximated to a museum acquisitions committee. Indeed, by the time the new TIFR buildings were inaugurated in 1962, over 100 paintings and sculptures had been acquired, and the tenor of the collection was now clearly the result of a buying logic of a museum rather than that of a private collection. Here we have an image of the old Bombay Yacht Club during the time that TIFR was in residence. One can see a good many contemporary masterpieces already in the collection, even if the display harks back to the salon-style hang of a slightly earlier and more amateurish time. Visions of what were to come at the new campus look very different from the exhibition at the Yacht Club. Here are architects' drawings from the 1950s showing state-of-the-art gallery spaces being designed for the new campus. Von Leyden wrote the following about Bhabha making good on that vision, quote, "The Tata Institute of Fundamental Research at Colaba is the supreme monument to Bhabha's vision, to his concept of integration and to his taste. It was for this institution that he collected over the years one of the finest and the most representative collections of contemporary Indian art. Dr. Bhabha felt very strongly that the cerebral activity of the scientist had to find its counterpoint in the activity of the senses in art," close quote. Von Leyden's description of the collection, both in terms of quality as well as the breadth of its representation, is telling. Here his confirmation of Bhabha's desire to collect art that not only appealed to his aesthetic sense, but which would be comprehensive in terms of its detailing the developing art scene at that time. Here, one is tempted to analogize the TIFR art holdings with a collection such as that built up by MoMA New York under the stewardship of its first director, Alfred H. Barr. In a memorable quote on the nature of the museum's collection, Barr wrote, quote, "The permanent collection may be thought of graphically as a torpedo moving through time, its nose in the ever-advancing present, its tail the ever-receding past." It was, close quote, it was Bhabha's ability to comprehend the importance of taking action in the present, even when the consequences might only be appreciated long after the act, that cements the argument of the TIFR art collection resembling most closely that of a museum. MGK Menon recalls an incident that occurred in Dehradun where he and Bhabha had traveled to meet Nehru. Quote, "As we got out of the car, he asked me if I knew what the trees were that were all around. I said, yes, they are Staculia apatela, to which he replied, yes, I'm going to have an entire avenue of them in Trombay. I said, but Homi, do you know how long they will take to grow? His reply was, I know, 100 years. You have to think of the future. Think big. The point is that he had vision, that one was not to be restricted by time or space and the little petty thoughts that came to people who have to see it, the consequence of their actions themselves, close quote. The artworks that are today housed amid the bustling corridors, foyers, offices, and classrooms of the Institute's campus are an extraordinary sight, designed by Chicago-based firm Holabird and Root through one of their principal architects, Helmut Barsch. The campus was inaugurated in 1962. The extraordinary local environment is incorporated into the design program through a long colonnaded walkway and an excess of large windows that offer extraordinary vistas onto the Arabian Sea. The entire complex is conceived within a modernist paradigm of the international style of architecture. Barsch, in his entry for the souvenir publication that accompanied the inauguration celebrations, explained his design philosophy as follows, quote, expressions have been given to each function or separate department by accenting the important individual building masses in an otherwise completely unified development. The architect has attempted to combine an impression of lightness and elegance in the type of architecture selected, as these characteristics seem eminently suited to the country, close quote. Bhabha's clear interest in the synthesis between art, architecture, and even landscape gardening echoes Barsch's vision for a completely unified development, but at the same time departs from the staple modernist conception of form following function. Bhabha was clearly inspired by the great Renaissance gardens of France with their grand geometric designs, the use of symmetry echoing his own mathematically inclined mind. We also need to contend with Bhabha as the patron of arts in the spirit of a Medici. Remember the quote that I gave earlier. As such, whilst the architecture of the TIFR complex projected a sensibility in keeping with its times, Bhabha's own personality ensured a total environment that was as much a blend of cultural movements as his own multifaceted makeup. So 1962 is the year that the campus is inaugurated. And it's the same year that Bhabha initiated a competition, which Dr. Godrej hinted at earlier. It was a competition really for the finest young artists in India. They were requested to submit entries to decide who should be commissioned to execute a major mural piece in the newly constructed A block. The committee set up to help Bhabha decide the winner of the competition was his familiar inner group. We've met them before, Kandalavala, von Leyden, Wadia, and Chandrasekharan. An internal memo of the period lists the artists requested to submit competition entries. It reads as a roll call of the most acclaimed painters from the younger generation. Ara, Bendre, Gaitonde, Gujral, Heba, Hussain, Padamsi, Prabha, Raval, Raza, and Sadvelkar. In addition, the names Shanti Dave, Ramkumar, and Jamni Roy were noted in a separate list, probably in case any of the first list were not able to participate. An advertisement was also placed as an open call for applications. From the initial list of invited artists, we do not have applications from Raza, Padamsi, and Gaitonde. And it seems that Jamni Roy was also added a bit later. So you've already seen the winner. Sorry, I gave that away immediately. In itself, this was an incredibly innovative idea. The final two artists shortlisted are here on this screen, R.D. Raval and M.F. Hussain. In a memorandum to the members of the mural judging committee, Homi explained why, in his view, Hussain should be chosen over Raval. I quote, "I am personally of the view that Raval, though elegant, is more manneristic, stylized, not as free, not as gestural. Quote, and it is possible that it may wear less well with time. The Hussain seems to me to be a more substantial and enduring composition, and in view of my knowledge of the artist's finished pictures, I would expect that the full-scale mural will be richer in texture and detail than the sketch. In light of Raval's present style, it is doubtful whether the full-scale mural will be any richer in texture or detail than the sketch." Close quote. In refusing to be seduced by the elegance of Raval's entry and by maintaining his focus only on that work which would stand the test of time, Bhabha displays a courage that stands unchallenged by any other patron of modern Indian art. Moreover, note here that he is aware of the fact that Hussain's sketch was not fully resolved in technique. And in fact, we have an oral history interview with Hussain before he passed, where he says, "I basically did it the night before. And my friend said, listen, you better just enter it now that you've done it." And so I did, and lo and behold, I won it. To be able to argue with unnerving certitude on the future reception of the artwork on the basis of a rough sketch alone is astonishing. Yet Bhabha did, and history has proved him absolutely correct. Today, Hussain stands almost alone as the iconic Indian artist of the 20th century, whilst Raval remains a distinguished footnote. To that extent, the extract above reveals an extraordinarily astute level of reasoning, foresight, and connoisseurship. So here you have Jamni Roy's competition entry. And underneath a letter that you can't read, but I will tell you about, that basically this is from Jamni Roy to Bhabha in December 1962, saying, basically, "Thank you so much, Dr. Bhabha, for inviting me to submit this application, this smaller work. I'm very happy to do that. And I'll get started on the big one, and I'll get that finished by January." And of course, he completely misunderstood the idea that this was a competition. He thought that he was just submitting the first part of what would inevitably be his large-scale contribution. So in fact, you have the line where he says, "I'll get the big one done in January," underlined by Homi with a big question mark next to it. Here you have two works which I feel speak very well to each other. At the top, Satish Gujral, his work Vigil, and at the bottom, Prabha, Black Moon. We'll be seeing a few more of Prabha's works a bit later. One of the few major women artists active during the 50s, 60s, and 70s. And so very important for the TIFR art collection. Entries by, on the top, Badri Narayan, a work he was exhibiting in Bombay at the time of the competition. Homi Bhabha turns up at his exhibition at Jahangir and says, "Listen, I'm having this painting competition. Why not submit something?" Badri said, "Actually, I'm in the middle of a show. My wife is heavily pregnant. This may not be the best time." But somehow he was forced to create this competition entry. He made it on brown paper, whatever was accessible to him. And here it is. It's actually a wonderful, wonderful painting. In the bottom, Bendray's Cosmos in the Making. And for me, the weakest work of the group, Civilization by Heber, for me, a little almost over-illustrative of the purpose of TIFR. And again, this goes back to whether one is building a collection specifically to speak to the purposes and aspirations of that entity. And here, perhaps it does a little cloyingly. And at the bottom, Ara's wild bacchanalian spring festival with figures cavorting and having a lot of fun, and a work that would never, ever get accepted in TIFR, I'm sure. As a side note, an extraordinary letter exists written by Homi Bhabha to his friend J.D. Bernal, a prominent Irish scientist and polymath who was known for his scientific contributions and communist leanings. He also had a close relationship with Pablo Picasso. During a party in Bernal's London flat in 1950, Picasso sketched a mural on the wall, which is now known as Bernal's Picasso. This mural depicting two angels became a symbol of the intersection of art and science and was saved even after the flat was demolished. And we have a letter from Bhabha dated November 1962, precisely at the moment he was in conversation with the Indian artists, where he says, quote, "My dear Bernal, I spoke to you about a wall in the entrance hall of the new building of the Tata Institute of Fundamental Research," so going behind the back of all the Indian artists, "which is 9 foot high and 45 foot long, which we intend to cover with a mural. We talked about the possibility of interesting Picasso in this on some special terms. As I explained to you then, a situation which has become even more pronounced now as a result of our conflict with the Chinese," please note the date, November 1962, "it is quite impossible for us to pay anything in foreign exchange, leave aside the type of price which would be appropriate for Picasso. However, I did suggest that we could pay him a first-class return airfare to India and a month's stay at our expense, together with arrangements for visiting and seeing some of the famous archaeological monuments in India, such as Elephanta, Ellora, Ajanta, so on and so forth. You were to inquire whether he would be interested and to let me know. I wonder if you've had any success. With best wishes, Homi Bhabha," close quote. So clearly that didn't come to fruition. What an extraordinary thing it would be to have a 45-foot Picasso mural in Navy Nagar, but that didn't happen. But I mean, we love the Hussein, don't get me wrong. It's wonderful. The works in the TIFR art collection were acquired either directly from artists or then from gallery shows. The inventory charts the course navigated by the art coming out of India in the first 20 years after independence. This includes 3 Ramkumars, 5 Tayyib Mehtas, and this is what we would call a flex, I think, 6 by Bendray, 9 by Hussein, 12 by Gaitonde, and an astonishing 21 by Ara. Beyond these, other artists represented include Raza Daviawala, Souza Heber, Krishan Khanna, and Jahangir Sabawala. For the student of modern Indian art history, the collection allows for a rare and thrilling opportunity. This is a collection that is not concerned with retrospective analysis. Instead, it is recording live, as it were, the reality of the situation on the ground. Remember Alfred Barr's analogy of the comet through space. Collections such as that of the TIFR teach us that art movements and schools are perennially fluid, and that neat categorizations obsessed over by art historians are rarely, if ever, mirrored by lived experience. The Progressive Artist Group held its first exhibition in 1949 and comprised of works by artists Hussein, Souza, Raza, Bakre, Ara, and Gade. And now comes the slightly controversial part of my talk. The Bombay leg of the exhibition lasted all of 6 days and was never to be repeated again with the same composition of artists, since 3 of the 6 members were to leave India within 1 year. Though new artists were brought in, the foundations of the group were so fragile to begin with that by 1954, the year in which that last exhibition to which Homi Bhabha was facilitated to inaugurate it, the PAG was actually formally disbanded. it has come to be believed that the PAG, the Progressive Artists Group, somehow was single-handedly responsible for turning the tide away from the conservative stalwarts of the 1940s art scene, and that its initial members were firebrands committed to unseating the generation that preceded them. This view has come down to us by several quirks of history. The first is that key members of the group outlived most of their contemporaries. Please look at the birth and death years for most of these progressive artist groups, artists. And Sousa, of course, was the most outspoken of his peers, and apart from writing the original manifesto of the group, was active in reinforcing the mythology of the PAG throughout his long and productive career. A second and equally important factor is that the group emerged at a moment that was almost ensured that every act would, in hindsight, be understood in oppositional terms to that which preceded them. This is 1949. This is a couple of years after independence. The potency of that date, in a sense, I think, is understood as a parallel to the trajectory underway in the political structure of the country at that time. The TIFR art collection, and this is the critical foundational thought really of my thinking about this collection, the TIFR art collection seems to tell a different story about the influence of the Progressive Artist Group in the context of developments within the cultural milieu of Bombay at that time. For one thing, Sousa's presence in the collection is minimal. I point you to the second left work here, plus there are two more works, but that's it. And it's explained by the fact, as I said earlier, he's left for England as early as 1949. And so therefore his artistic voice is simply not there to be heard at the outset of the 1950s, when the art scene in post-independence India was still in its infancy. Indeed, when he did exhibit next in India, which was in 1960, the works were roundly denounced by none other than his most loyal supporter from the late 1940s, our dear friend Rudy von Leyden. In my view, von Leyden and the other tastemakers of the late 1940s were more taken with the formal innovations of the PAG than any of the social and political content ascribed to the work, either by the artists themselves or by art historians over the next 6 decades. Sousa's departure from the country was followed quickly by Raza's own emigration to France in 1950, and it again stands to reason why there are only 2 examples of his work in the TIFR collection, of which one is here on the left-hand side. Hussein, of course, we do have plenty of examples, and in fact, Hussein, in a sense, became an unofficial broker of sorts for his artist friends and the collectors of the art advisory group. If it was not the case that artists associated with the original Progressive Artist Group dominated the Indian art scene in the 1950s, and by extension the TIFR art collection, then which artists were being shown and collected? The TIFR Register of Paintings and Sculptures that details the artworks bought by the Institute between 1952 and 1962 proves instructive in this respect. In that time, TIFR purchased 102 paintings and sculptures by 41 artists, most of whom who had no particular connection to the Progressive Artist Group. What we must conclude about the nature of the collection, and by extension the nature of the art scene during the decade after independence, is that at no point did any particular school, movement, or group come to dominate. Instead, the Indian art world was driven by the evolution of individual artistic voices. Of course, it is the case that there were significant overlaps in the concerns of artists practicing at that time, but we should ascribe this to the spirit of the moment, a zeitgeist, rather than an agenda driven from within, i.e. one manifesto driven by the Progressive Artist Group. And written in 1965, in the respected journal Lalit Kala Contemporary, there exists, sorry, that was the previous slide, there exists an essay by Badri Narayan, the artist who we've already seen as part of the painting competition. He writes a highly important essay, which he titles Artists of the Third Epoch. And he formulates this new term to define that group of artists that we're looking at the TIFR within the campus. He defines the three epochs in the following manner, quote, "The first epoch in modern Indian art belongs to what is now called the Bengal school, led by Abanindranath Tagore. The second to independent and stylistically divergent painters like Jamini Roy and Amrita Sher-Gill, and this is the third epoch. The third to those many painters, too numerous to be named individually, too varied in their outlook, those artists who emerged around about the 1950s of this century, turning for inspiration not only to their own primitive prehistoric and the more archaic and early miniature traditions, but also to the makers of the new patrimony." And he's referring here to artists like Klee, Mondrian, Miro, and the host of those eclectic masters of the post-impressionist moment. And he refers then to artists like Heber, Hussain, Bendre, Padamsi, Subramanian, Ramkumar, Shanku Chowdhury, Daviavala, Gaitonde Ara, P.T. Reddy, artists who are not part of the Progressive Artists Group, but who are very much part of the TIFR art collection. So for me, suddenly we have a model that fits very nicely, and that is the artists of the third epoch. He said, he concludes about them. "What I have to emphasize is that the definite increase in artistic theorizing, however misapplied they may seem, the introspective self-induced states, the loud discussions, the declaration of ideologies and manifestos at one-man shows, and the resorting to the system of grouping together in a bond of shared ideals and common aims are all symptomatic of the artists of the third epoch, and that a period of transition like ours is also the period of intellectual and creative preparation. In conclusion, the period of pioneers." And so I feel, again, Homi Bhabha's project at TIFR is very much in line with this idea of the period of pioneers, of which, of course, he was one, but then also the artists that he chose and his group of insiders chose to show as part of the collection. So I've already shown you in the previous slide, Langhammer and Raza. Here, I'm trying to suggest a global influence within the locals. So Langhammer, in a sense, is bringing the influence of expressionism from the modernist moment in Europe to India, becoming highly influential on the work of a young S.H. Raza. The second point I'm trying to make in this slide is that it's not necessarily this direct break. We shouldn't see the group of artists at TIFR in necessary oppositional terms to what came before, because in fact they were building on the shoulders of giants. And so here on the left, I have a photo of an image that is not part of the TIFR collection, but is in fact made by an anonymous student of the JJ School of Art in the late 1940s. And this artwork is a product of the department run by Jagannath Ahivasi, who at that time was bringing forward a synthesis of Indian miniature, of the painting style of Ajanta with Western modernism in the form that you see it. And in my view, early works of Sousa and of Hussain, which are in the TIFR collection, certainly bear some correspondence with the earlier work of the Bombay revivalists and the subsequent generations. Equally, I feel that works such as the one on the left is part of the series by Lakshman Pai, Geet Govind, and the work on the right by Krishan Khanna also betray an influence of that late Bombay revivalist style. Please note that Krishan Khanna is incredibly important, as it is the first painting he ever sold, and it was indeed brokered by Hussain to Homi Bhabha. So it's a work that Krishan Khanna himself feels very strongly about. The other thing that we can do with the collection at TIFR is we can start building narratives similar to the way that Badri Narayan describes them in Artists of the Third Epoch. The way that artists go through these short-lived affiliations with different artists, that they're moving, in a sense, in and out of each other's orbits. So I'm going to use V.S. Gaitonde as my example here. In the top left is a very early work of his. We have two works from 1953, I think. So this is the first one. Again, I think here one can see the influence of late Bombay revivalist painting coming out of J.J. School. And also one can see the influence of classical painting, classical dance in the form of sketches here by Nena von Leyden, K.K. Heber, and Shavaks Chavda. But, in the same year, 1953, I can also claim a visual correspondence in Gaitonde's work with an artist such as B. Prabha. We've seen Prabha as she would paint in the early 60s already, and there you can see a correspondence with the work of Satish Gujral. But here, 6 years earlier, one can certainly see these two artists in visual dialogue with each other. Now, I'm not claiming that this comes out of any conscious desire to paint like one another. Rather, I'm saying that the idea of the zeitgeist functioned such that people moved in and out of each other's spheres quite unconsciously. And so here, moving forward another 7-8 years, I would bring into relationship the work on the right of V.S. Gaitonde. We're now getting to his mature phase. He's entirely dissolved the figure. It's entirely abstract now, his compositional structure of the canvas. And on the left, a work by another artist whose work is seen over a period of time at TIFR, Homi Patel. And in fact, the work on the left was exhibited in the director's office for a number of years. And I think showing, therefore, how important they felt about the work at that time. But here, clearly, I think in the early 60s, one can see a relationship between these two artists. And if I may add one more artist to the conversation, on the left, Baburao Sadvelka. So again, same, 1960s to we're in the first 5 years of the 1960s. And again, all three, I would argue, can be seen to be in correspondence with each other. Now, fast forward another couple of years, and I feel that these two artists have now reached their own sense of a visual vocabulary which will stay somewhat static for some time. And Homi Patel and V.S. Gaitonde beginning to move away from each other. Again, what other collection in India in the world could possibly give us this extraordinary journey through 10 to 15 years? And now we'll leave Gaitonde behind and we'll move forward with Homi Patel. Look what happens to Patel's work moving forward a couple of years. Now, out of the visual correspondence with Gaitonde, I would say that he's now more in line with the oncoming visual style, which would be known as the neo-tantric style, formulated originally by the author Ajit Mukherjee and then put into practice most famously by artists such as Jia Santosh and Biren Dey. And I think Homi Patel becomes a fellow traveler of that movement by the early 1970s. One thing about the TIFR collection, and going back to our earlier conversation about the fact that there was never any desire or any mandate to slavishly follow subject matter as far as the intersection of art and science is concerned, quite the other end of the spectrum emerges here, works which, I also help with other collections, including within hotels, and I can tell you these works would never be allowed in the public areas or in the rooms of. But here we are in TIFR with Nalini Malani's Death of an Individual and Krishan Khanna's The Dead and the Dying displayed, literally in the foyer of A Block as one walks in. Incredibly dark, ruminative, but strong and powerful and evocative works. And clearly, these artists, one can see the correspondence between the two. Using another Nalini work from 1970, Egress, I've here put her next to Dashrat Patel's Oil on Canvas and Nasreen Mohammadi's extraordinary collage from 1967. So again, this semi-abstraction, the monochromatic palettes. Again, for me, clearly these now Nalini is moving into a mode where one could put her in conversation with these artists. Now, I said earlier, it's unconscious, but at some moments, Dr. Godrej spoke earlier about her beginning Simrosa Gallery, which happened in 1971. Prior to that, close to her, of course, was the Bulabai Desai Institute in Breach Candy. And there, Nalini Malani, Nasreen Mohammadi actually were around talking to each other, sharing conversations. They studied photography under Akbar Padamsi in his Visions Exchange workshop. So all these sorts of close collaborations also helping the spirit of communication at that time. Someone also has to tell me when to stop, Indra. So you will also tell me when to stop, please. And Shabak Chavda and KK Heba moving into two Bombay-based artists. Now, the stylized figure coming back into interplay. You must remember this moment in which the TIFR builds the collection. You see the dissolution of the figure from around the mid-1950s into a large range of artists who were entirely wedded to abstraction. Chavda and Heba were two artists who were not, so they remain in the figurative mode, although the work is very stylized, as you can see. And some little outliers, I would say. We don't have so many works of theirs in the collection. I think did I spy a T-shirt or a mug with the Ganesh Pine? I think so. You can all collect your Ganesh Pine mugs. Yeah, but again, deeply introspective, psychologically introspective works, again, which I think one can productively put side by side. Anjali Elamenon, a little like B. Prabha, would go on to make works in a very different register later in her career. But at this point in time, the work is really quite dark. And also we have the incipient influence coming in from Baroda. Here we have teacher and student. Teacher on the right, KG Subramanian, product of Shanti Niketan, and then moves down to Baroda, becoming one of the first faculty in Baroda, and then his student, of course, Jyoti Bhatt. And these still lives harking back, of course, to an earlier point in the late 19th century, early 20th century, and of course, a history which goes back many centuries. But here, thinking through, again, this relationship between abstraction and figuration. Going beyond these kinds of juxtapositions, I just wanted to highlight a few of the masterpieces of the collection. You would have encountered this as you first entered this afternoon, coming into the auditorium. K.H. Ara's Lest We Forget His Sacrifice, 1964, a work that was exhibited as part of the Eucharist Congress. The Catholic Church had organized this in Bombay. It was exhibited at Gallery Kemmeld, and what a painting it is, and what a painting for TIFR of all institutes to acquire. Here is Christ crucified on an atomic mushroom cloud, atop a heap of bodies, something like a Hieronymus Bosch Garden of Earthly Delights, an extraordinary vista, and again, provocative, challenging, and quite unlike any other kind of corporate art collection being acquired at that time. We've talked a lot about V.S. Gaitonde already, but I couldn't help but include the work on the left from the TIFR collection. It is, in fact, called Painting Number 4. The reason I'm including it here is because MoMA, a small museum in New York, happens to have Painting Number 6. So here, again, one can see the quality and distinction of TIFR's holdings. Jahangir Sabharwala, the quintessential Bombay artist, someone who actually surprisingly doesn't have so many works represented in the TIFR collection. In an unguarded moment he told me that he and Homi Bhabha didn't exactly see eye to eye. So maybe that was the reason that not so many works were in the collection. However, significant work was bought during Homi Bhabha's lifetime, and that is Seagulls and Sails. And of course, I would go back to the fact, as I was saying earlier, by virtue of the fact that Homi Bhabha had this group of advisors, it was the acquisitions policy was not dependent on the whims and fancies of an individual. It is the case that at that time, there were still the hangovers of a somewhat feudal system of acquisitions because of the absence of the commercial gallery system. So therefore, artists and collectors had to negotiate directly together. One didn't have the buffer of the commercial gallery system at that time. But anyway, here are 3 magnificent works by Sabharwala in the TIFR collection. And of course, it wasn't just paintings. Another misnomer which the progressive artist group trope or mythology propounds is the fact that they were all painters. But let's not forget there were some very fine sculptors active in the 1950s onwards, no more so than Adi Davyawala. Adi Davyawala, who was a trained chemist, who gave that up to become a full-time sculptor. And his major patron was indeed Homi Bhabha. And that is why the TIFR campus has perhaps the greatest collection of Davyawala's works in existence, including, of course, Woman with Ankh, a large, more than full-size figure. Also, the wonderful, whimsical He and She with dog and owner. And of course, the extraordinary Thunderbird. Andrea, can one see that outside? One can see that outside. Thunderbird by Adi Davyawala, accompanied by a letter on the right, which again, sadly, you can't read. So I'm going to read it for you. The painting, the sculpture dates from 1964, and Professor Chandrasekharan went to see the exhibition at Jahangir Art Gallery, and he reported the following to Homi Bhabha. I saw, quote, I saw Davyawala's show. He said Air India wanted the Thunderbird. He was waiting for your word. I think it is rather nice. I felt it would have shown up much better if it had been on a pedestal which looked more slender. He agreed. I liked the standing figure in iron printed on his brochure. It would look very nice if exhibited in proper surroundings, not that horrible place. It's Jahangir Art Gallery. But anyway, Air India was, of course, the other significant corporate collection acquiring aggressively during this period. And for whatever reason, it was, well, perhaps because TIFR was such a staunch supporter of Davyawala that it ended up in the TIFR art collection. Other sculptors, again, student and teacher, Shankar Chaudhary, another teacher at Baroda, one of the early faculty, again, originating from Shantiniketan and coming down to Baroda, and a student, Raghav Kanaria. Again, works that you can see out in the foyer. So please, I'd encourage you to have a look after we're finished. It's not, oh yeah, it's just about fit. This is Pilu Pochkanawala. So one of the very few women artists who was practicing actively in the commercial gallery system at that time. We've already looked at Prabha's work, and here is Pilu Pochkanawala's work, again engaged in public art projects in the city, most famously at Haji Ali. I have a little letter which was written by J.R.D. Tata to Pilu Pochkanawala. I'm just going to read a little bit of it. Written in 1973, how nice of you to want to educate a Philistine like myself. I hope I am not too old to learn, and I do appreciate at least the ingenuity and imagination displayed in your sculptures and those of other talented artists. Would it be wrong, however, to impose on all creative art, including sculpture, painting, music, or poetry, the test of how it is likely to be considered 100 years or even 1,000 years from now? I cannot help but feel that if any of the type of figurative or semi-abstract sculpture which you and others have been creating were to survive by then, it will be considered by the people of those days as little more than a light-hearted interlude indulged in by their ancestors of the second half of the 20th century, in the continuous process of serious creativity from the beginning of time. The sketches from your sketchbook at the end of your brochure show so much craft and talent that I wish you would one day use them to create something perhaps less avant-garde, but of deeper and more lasting significance. Ouch. But so what I find most interesting here is that JRD is at one level saying his own personal taste might be something, but at the same time, he's responsible for this extraordinary accumulation of art across the Tata Group and group companies, and indeed, in essence, in some small way for what happens at TIFR. And I feel that's the making of a great person, that they look beyond their own personal taste to allow the flowering of creativity, just as Homi Bhabha himself did. Homi Bhabha, as we know, passed away tragically in a plane crash in the Alps in 1966, in January 1966. And here we have JRD with Homi Bhabha's bust, which was inaugurated the year after, and indeed JRD with MGK Menon, who went on to succeed him and would be the second director until 1975. And the collection did not stop. It carried on forcefully right through MGK Menon's period as a director. Just a few examples. One from 1971, J. Swaminathan. There's also a Words and Lines series from the 60s. This is the 70s work. And then, of course, works, some of which you'll see outside, extraordinary series of paintings by Tayeb Mehta, dating from 1968 until the final year of MGK Menon's directorship in 1975, tracing that period of the inception to the maturation of what would be called Tayeb's diagonal series, this forceful diagonal which emerges from the bottom left up to the top right. The middle period of the TIFR art collection was defined by the move from figuration to abstraction throughout the world's art centers. In India, these shifts took place within a backdrop of increasing interaction between artists both at a local and global level, fueled by the increasing social mobility that an increasingly organized art market brought with it. It is perhaps not surprising, therefore, that short-lived allegiances and fleeting artistic relationships define Indian art in the era between the early 1950s and the late 1960s. The TIFR collection bears witness to these micro-convergences amongst the artists that it collected, and therefore cautions the student of modern Indian art away from understanding the period as one of grand movements. By putting to rest the mythology surrounding the influence of the progressive artist group, the point is not to dismiss it. Rather, it is to see it in the context of a multiplicity of competing voices that were heard at this time. The cacophonous nature of the art scene shortly after independence is one that should be admired by our generation, tending as it is towards a homogenization of styles. If we lose a grand narrative through demoting the status of the PAG, what we gain is the vibrancy of a scene in constant flux, the perfect grounding for fresh, exciting ideas, and a perfect ally to an institution such as the TIFR. And I'd like to close by quoting the words of one of Homi's favorite artists, that of course is Adi Davirwala. And this was published in the Times of India just 3 days after Bhabha's death. Quote, "He was never cursory. In fact, he often visited an exhibition a second time. His grasp of art forms, old and new, was intuitive. His judgment clear and unbiased. His purchases magnanimous. Over the past decade, he used his funds at his disposal to build a comprehensive collection of contemporary painting and sculpture, which today ranks amongst the finest in the country." He ended, "The fine collection is bereft of its patron, but stands today as the legacy of a genius who was a prince among men. Without him, art is orphaned." Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mortimer. That was really brilliant. Absolutely. And this is a fitting tribute to TIFR's art collection and sets a very high standard for the next events of TIFR, our art and archives events of TIFR. Now, I would like to just tell everybody that TIFR has completed 80 years. Yesterday was our foundation day. The TIFR was founded on 1st of June, 1945. So, okay, now I would like to convey my heartful thanks to many of the people here. We thank our partner, Art Mumbai, for their support to this event and look forward to a sustained relationship with them in future. We specifically thank Minal Wazirani of Saffron Art and Zoya Kathawala and her team from Art Mumbai. We thank all members of the Art and Archives Committee of TIFR for their guidance and encouragement. Special thanks to the archives team, Nilesh, Sagar, and Amit for their dedication. Many thanks to the volunteers, the student volunteers. They have really worked very hard. I personally would like to thank all of them. TIFR security, audiovisual section, catering, computer section, gardening sections for their support to this event. Without their support, this event could not have happened. And the last but not the least, a big thanks to all of you here in the audience for taking out your time to attend this event. Thank you very much. And we hope to see you more often at TIFR's public and outreach events. Okay, now I would request you to join for refreshments. Thank you.